This country once carried out an unprecedented human experiment. On that day, the entire population drank a strange potion. From then on, everyone gained the ability to read minds. They believed that if everyone could understand each other's thoughts, then there would be no more misunderstandings or crimes in the country, and it would become a perfect nation. But strangely enough, things didn't unfold as beautifully as they had imagined. Whenever someone had evil thoughts, even the slightest negative emotion would immediately be sensed by others. People no longer dared to interact with one another, afraid that their inner thoughts might be discovered. In no time, the whole country fell into chaos, and everyone was forced to live in isolation. The chaos in the entire country was only brought under control after the introduction of robots. One day, a traveler named Kino happened to pass through this country. She noticed that there were no guards at the city gates to register visitors. Everything was operated solely by robots. Kino toured the country, but didn't encounter a single human being, as if the entire nation was being run by machines alone. Though the robots provided thoughtful service, Kino never once saw a real person anywhere in the country. She couldn't understand where all the people had gone. With nothing else to do, she could only practice her gun drawing technique at the hotel. Soon, Kino had stayed in this country for 3 days already. It was time for her to head to the next place. But just as she reached the outskirts of the city, she finally saw the country's residents. And the moment they saw Kino, they all hid from her, as if they were terrified of her. Kino didn't understand why they were so afraid of her. Just then, she came across a man tending a garden. The man was startled by Kino and tried to run away. But when he realized he couldn't read her mind, he understood that she was an outsider. He finally let his guard down and invited Kino into his home. The man's name was Ivan. He told Kino that this was once a highly advanced technological nation. The scientists wanted to make it even more harmonious and perfect, so they invented a potion that could grant people mind-reading abilities. Ivan was one of the people who drank it. At first, he was lucky. He used that special ability to find the love of his life. They fell in love at first sight and shared a happy marriage. But soon after, problems began to appear in their relationship. As they came to understand each other more deeply, Ivan realized that he and his wife were very different. She loved gardening, while Ivan was passionate about music. Because of their differing interests, even if they tried to hide their feelings with lies, those thoughts were instantly exposed by the mind reading. Soon, they had fewer and fewer things to talk about, and their married life grew dull. Eventually, a small disagreement led to them living separately, and the same thing happened to everyone else in the country. Everyone was forced to live alone. To put an end to the disaster, Ivan hadn't talked to anyone in a long time. He was genuinely happy. He chatted with Kino about many things, and even shared his favorite music with her. But Kino was, after all, just a traveler, and it was time for her to move on. Ivan asked her if she would stay and live there, but Kino ultimately declined. Not long after she left, Kino saw a house overflowing with flowers, and the ones in front were the same kind Ivan had in his garden. Kino was certain this was the home of Ivan's wife. Though they no longer lived together, she was still listening to the music he once loved. Kino rode off on her motorcycle. Her heart felt heavy and conflicted. Maybe everyone harbors dark thoughts deep down. Maybe the world needs a few kind-hearted lies. This world is far from perfect, but perhaps that's what makes it so beautiful. On a snowy, stormy night, Kino, in the vast white snowfield, came across a stranded truck. Its engine had long since died, but inside were still 3 people, barely alive. They told her they had been stranded out here for a long time, and had already eaten all the food they had. They pleaded with Kino to save them, but the food Kino carried was only enough for one person. Still, she couldn't bring herself to just let them die. She agreed to go out and hunt for them. Before long, Kino, with her precise marksmanship, managed to shoot and capture a wild rabbit. The 3 men were so hungry that the moment they saw the rabbit, they lunged at it, trying to eat it raw, but Kino stopped them. She built a fire and cooked the rabbit over the flames. The 3 men devoured the meat like wild animals, nearly swallowing the bones as well. Kino didn't eat the rabbit meat with them. Instead, she kindly added nutritional supplements into their drinks. She hoped the 3 of them could recover their strength quickly. The 3 men were deeply grateful to Kino. One of them even gave her a valuable-looking ring. It turned out the ring was originally meant to be a gift for his wife. That night, Kino, as always, took out her handgun and practiced her quick draw and aiming routines over and over again. It was a daily ritual she never skipped. Then she used the heat from the motorcycle engine to boil water, added nutritional supplements to the hot water, and gave the drink to the three men. After that, Kino went out to hunt more rabbits. Soon, it was the third day. The snow finally began to melt. The three men had regained their strength. They started talking about the customs of their home country. Every year after the autumn harvest, the men in their country would travel abroad to trade. If they could safely return before winter, their nation would hold a festival called the Survivor's Ceremony to celebrate. One of the men had originally planned to propose to his lover on the day of the ceremony. There's a legend that anyone who proposes on that day will be blessed with happiness for the rest of their life. But now, they feared they wouldn't make it back in time. Kino told them not to lose hope. She promised to help them. The next day, Kino managed to pull the truck out of the snow. The three men were so overjoyed, they danced with excitement. But just as Kino was about to leave, the three of them suddenly pointed their guns at her. They said they didn't want to shoot the person who saved their lives, but they had to bring the goods back home. And the goods they spoke of were humans. They figured someone as young and healthy as Kino could fetch a high price. In their country, human trafficking was legal. They ordered Kino to drop her weapons. Kino cooperated and threw down both of her guns. But the moment the men let their guard down, Kino pulled a hidden weapon and shot one of them on the spot. Then, in a flash, she charged forward and took out the other two. Kino stood still for a long time. She hadn't expected human nature to be this horrifying. Curious, Kino walked to the back of the truck. Suddenly, the ghost of a young girl floated out of the cargo area, and deep inside the truck bed lay a pile of human bones. Kino now understood why the three men hadn't starved to death in the snow. She silently removed the ring and returned it to the man's body. In the distance, rabbit skins hung from a tree. A cruel and bitter irony. Kino had hoped to shine a light of hope on them, but perhaps the darkness in people's hearts can never be illuminated. Kino saved their lives, but they tried to trade her life for profit. The most terrifying thing in this world is not the cold of a blizzard, but when some people treat the kindness of others as chips they can trample without remorse. A few days later, Kino arrived in a very strange country. It was called the Land of Prophecy. According to a government inspector, the world was going to end in 3 days. If Kino chose to stay until then, she would witness the end along with them. Kino walked into the streets. She noticed that black uniforms had become the standard attire for everyone in the country. She then arrived at a hotel to check in, but the clerk told her that all rooms were now free of charge. Because the world was ending, money no longer had any value. The next day, Kino stepped into a gun shop. The shopkeeper handed her ammunition and custom parts, also without asking for a single coin. In the distance, the high priest was reading from the book of prophecy on a raised platform. He declared that disaster would strike in 3 days, and the entire world would be reset. Everyone stood in silence, listening. An old man told Kino that the book of prophecy actually came from a distant land. It was passed from place to place, until it eventually made its way here. Originally, it was nothing more than an old, ordinary text, but under the high priest's interpretation, it had been given the power of faith. Not everyone believed in it, but no one opposed it either, because in a world that was about to end, doubt had lost its meaning. Everyone calmly began their final prayers. The old man invited Kino to join them, but she declined. After all, she was just a traveler. She wouldn't involve herself in the affairs of any country. Back at the hotel, Kino reflected on the strangeness of this nation. At that moment, Hermes the talking motorcycle was also curious. The night was so quiet. It too began to wonder if the world really would end tomorrow. But Kino didn't seem to care much. Even if the world were ending tomorrow, she still wanted to get a good night's sleep. The next day, everyone gathered together, but the world did not end. Angry voices erupted across the plaza. People were shouting and cursing the high priest, calling him a fraud. The high priest responded by saying he had miscalculated by 1 day. The real end, he claimed, would be tomorrow, but this time, his words sparked growing doubt. Then another priest stepped forward. He announced that the true end of the world would happen in 30 years. Some people believed him, others still had their doubts. After all, 30 years was a long way off. Kino left the country, but the arguments in the plaza continued. A new doomsday date had already begun quietly spreading among the crowd. An ordinary object, once given special meaning by those in power, can make people believe without question, but those who remain clear-headed will always hold fast to their own judgment. Not long after, Kino arrived in a country known as the Land of Sorrow. Transportation here was by boat. Because the entire city was built on water, the whole place seemed to be filled with sadness. From time to time, a soft, haunting chant floated through the air, stirring up a deep, inexplicable melancholy. The boatman told Kino that it was called the Poem of Sorrow. It had been passed down for generations in this country, in memory of a great poet named Joseph. He was hailed as the most gifted poet in the world. His inspiration came from the happiness he found in his family. But when the king heard about this, he summoned Joseph to the royal palace out of sheer mischief. The king ordered him to compose a poem of sorrow, and gave him 19 days to complete it. If Joseph failed to produce a poem the king approved of within 19 days, he would be executed. Joseph agonized over it, but couldn't find any inspiration for a sorrowful poem, because, in his heart, he was simply too happy. Desperate, Joseph began to panic. His wife, unable to bear the thought of him being executed, decided to take her own life, so that Joseph could understand what sorrow truly felt like. After her death, a wave of grief washed over Joseph. He then composed a poem filled with sorrow, and that poem changed the fate of the entire nation. The sorrow it carried was too heavy to bear. The king banished Joseph from the palace, but Joseph's heart was already drowned in sadness. He began wandering across the land, and soon, the sorrowful melody spread throughout the nation. Not long after, the king died of illness, but Joseph continued to sing the poem of sorrow. At the moment of his death, people thought the tragedy had finally come to an end, but at his funeral, Joseph's 14-year-old daughter recited the entire poem of sorrow word for word. The poem didn't end, it simply passed on to someone else. Since then, every 10 years, a new 14-year-old girl would emerge in the country to continue singing the poem of sorrow. 3 days later, Kino prepared to leave. An inspector asked her how she felt about the journey. She answered honestly that it hadn't been a pleasant one. The inspector said he understood. He also mentioned that the ancient book recording the poem of sorrow seemed to have made its way to another country, where it was transformed into the book of prophecy. That night, Kino pitched her tent by the edge of the forest. Suddenly, she saw a large group of tanks heading straight toward the Land of Sorrow. A soldier spotted Kino. After confirming she was just a traveler, he did not trouble her. They were soldiers from the Land of Prophecy. That book, now interpreted by the priests in their own country, had become the Book of Prophecy. It foretold that their country was facing an impending apocalypse, so they decided to launch a preemptive war to destroy the Land of Sorrow, in hopes of saving the world. Hermes, the motorcycle, watched the army disappear into the distance, and softly asked Kino, "Which side will you help?" Kino looked up at the starry sky. She wouldn't help either side, because she was just a witness. These two nations were like mirrors. One tried to build its future on faith, the other remained trapped in its past. Grieving, Joseph's sorrowful poem had been interpreted into written words. Those words became faith. That faith, once worshipped, became the justification for war. A poem born from tragedy was treated as divine prophecy in another land, and eventually, it caused a real tragedy. This wasn't the cycle of fate, it was a choice made by humans. People are always searching for meaning. They interpret, reinterpret, and pass it down again and again, yet never ask if it was even true to begin with. Joseph only wanted to express his sorrow, but the followers used it to bring about destruction. There was nothing wrong with the words themselves. The fault lies with those who believed them and forgot to question. That's why Kino won't get involved. She's just a bystander. Her journey must continue. What makes this anime so compelling is that it never once tells you what's right or wrong. Everything Kino encounters on her travels is merely a reflection, not an answer. She will always remain an observer. Through her eyes, we come to see the irony of the world. The right to judge doesn't belong to the people in the story, and not even to the one who created it. The story simply lays the question bare and asks us to think, if it were you, in that situation, what would you choose?